This is a global skills podcast, conversations that shape the future of work and learning. We're exploring how we close the skills gap and build a future where everyone has the chance to thrive. From education to business, connecting people, ideas, and opportunities that drive change. It's about collaboration, curiosity, and creating real impact today. Because every skill learned brings us one step closer to a more inclusive world. The Global Skills Podcast, where learning and opportunity come together. Today's guest is helping shape how Ireland competes, grows, and future-proofs its talent in a rapidly changing global economy. With over 2 decades at the heart of Ireland's enterprise and investment ecosystem, she leads talent development and digital transformation at IDA Ireland, working closely with more than 1,800 multinational companies operating across the country. At a time when Ireland is doubling down on digitalisation, sustainability, and advanced skills to attract next-generation investment, her work sits at the centre of national priorities, ensuring Ireland remains a destination not just for capital, but for meaningful careers and long-term opportunity. Known for collaboration, people-first approach, she brings a deeply human lens to workforce development and system-level change. Please welcome Breda O'Toole, Head of Client Talent Development and Digitalisation at IDA Ireland. You're very welcome, Breda.
Oh, thank you, Vanessa.
I would love to know, because you have seen 2 decades of how Ireland has transformed, and it was actually very much around the time I started my career. I was the excitement of Google landing in Ireland and the jobs that would be created, and Dell had already been here for, I think, 10 years. What has it been like for you, seeing how much Ireland has changed in these past few years?
It's very privileging, actually. I guess working for the agency, obviously, I'm a public servant. So to be able to say you're associated with the level of job creation in the country it's very privileging. And I suppose a lot of my career was in the UK. And as I was coming home to visit my family every year, I could just see year on year how much the country was developing. Its infrastructure started to be built out. Some of the decisions on economics that was being made in the country was really exciting and very focused on being pro-business. And that approach, I think, by successive governments has really paid dividends for Ireland. And I could definitely see it over time, how it became, certainly our job isn't easy, but it certainly became easier to be able to sell Ireland because we had a great value proposition, and we still do. So it was much easier to go into the marketplace and start to say, well, yes, we have Boston Scientific and we have Stryker, Google, and we have Facebook. And all of a sudden, we had a lot more companies to be able to cite being here than we ever could, even like 20 years ago. I think it's grown really quickly over the last 20 years. And certainly if I look at it from my own perspective, from a talent perspective, without doubt and without failure, all our companies say that one of the key attributes that Ireland has is an exceptional workforce, and talent is absolutely key. Now, people listening to this podcast could laugh and say, oh yes, and what about all the tax breaks? But they all add to it. So let's not forget there are a lot of really good attractors to bringing investment, foreign direct investment to Ireland. But talent is one that's repeatedly mentioned by our chief executives of our subsidiaries here in Ireland. So we have to make sure that we retain that momentum and continue to build on that, I think, more critically than anything now. And of course, I think, finally, I'd say, Anna, Vanessa, I've seen, certainly over time, you'd have seen this too, because we're so global and because we're so linked to Europe, we have phenomenal importing of people into the workforces here and into the sites of Ireland. I never saw that when I was a young girl growing up here. I mean, the amount of international people we have here is just fabulous. I mean, it's really contributed to Irish society, I think, not just to the business economics of the country, but to the society as well. It's wonderful.
You can feel that in Dublin. It's I'm going to use the word cosmopolitan because I always think that maybe New York has that vibe, and I'm not saying it's at the level there, but it's transformed so much, and it's the richness of talent. Because I remember, in the 2000s, you had a really good higher education in Ireland. That's what maybe initially landed the first few, but now if you're looking at 2-3 decades of the rich talent that's developed here, and for such a small country, it's remarkable. But I'm very keen to ask you a question. Like, a lot of the listeners are maybe they're starting out in their careers, or maybe they're thinking of, a new direction. Your earlier career in the UK, what got you on that path? And then what made you decide to go into public serving?
Well, I will say to all your listeners, go for it. Take any opportunity that's presented, and don't ever think that the discipline maybe you originally started in cannot be used again. I'll share my story quickly. So just to substantiate that, I started in Shannon College of Hotel Management, which so it was hotel management I was going into. Now, okay, you could say that, there's a lot of customer service and client engagement in that, hence what I'm doing now. The last year of that course was in the UK, based with Trust House 40 in the UK. So I was in the north of England, and then you got your first position. And, when you're a young person, you need money, you need a job, and you take the first job. And we're very lucky in that particular course because it enabled us to go to get a first position, if you like. So you're kind of assistant manager in a large hotel in a city. And for the first time, you're earning a few pounds, as it was in the UK. But after some time, I left that and joined a museum. And in the museum, I got a position as a training officer. And I just fell in love with that whole world of learning and development. I hope it doesn't sound too cocky, but I actually wasn't bad at it. So I guess I was there for a few years, and I loved that world because that world, it was busy. So what I tried to do was fit in with the culture of what was going on in that organization. It was very busy, lots of customers coming through the museum. So we did a lot of training in work time in the museum. So I had a few languages. So I went out with what we were called then attendants. And, I'd say to them, okay, this is how you'd say to somebody in French. There's the toilets, or there is the second exhibition, or there's the third exhibition. So a lot of that was done in the moment, in the time. But I was very lucky there because I managed to be involved in the development of the exhibitions as well. So I suppose I didn't realize it then, but I was learning new skills that I kind of didn't have when I came in there. So that was wonderful, like project management, selling in the museum, because there was a paid through museum. But those sort of skills that maybe I didn't bring in with me. Then I moved into public service in the UK, and I was working for Bolton Metropolitan Borough Council. And that was a fabulous experience because that was probably, I got more interface with the community there. So in the work I was doing in a central function in both personnel and in development, I was able to get out into the communities to help facilitate groups coming together. I mean, the exposure was phenomenal. But again, I didn't realize I was developing all these additional skills, facilitation skills, and understanding different cultures, because the borough was servicing the people of Bolton. And there was 350,000 people of completely mixed race, nationality, wonderful exposure. And then I was very fortunate to get my first ever job in Ireland with IDA Ireland. So I was able to bring those skills that we had, that I suppose I cultivated in the UK over here, because we'd been involved very heavily with the then Labour government, and they brought in new legislation around competition in councils. So I was involved with that. So a lot of exposure in the UK that I believe I've tried to bring in here to IDA in the way that I do my work. And in the IDA, you get lots and lots of opportunities. At my level, I guess the chief executive rings you one day and he says, Breda, I want you to do X, or I want you to do Y. And you just say, okay, then. And you go and you try and make the best of the job, or create or develop the job that you're in. And so, I was in regional development, and I was in operations, and now in this job. So a lot of exposure to phenomenal clients. Let's face it, Vanessa, IDA is a good agency, but without the clients and the companies we have here, because they're the ones that are actually creating the jobs, that's what makes the difference. So it's wonderful and exciting to work with companies like I'm working with. Really exciting. So you can see a lot of difference in those jobs. So I think to anybody listening in, it is really about recognizing you're learning a new skill if you can. Don't be afraid to give things a go, because there's always people that want to help you. And if somebody does come along to you, particularly your chief executive, and says, do this job, this is what I want, I think the key question to always ask is, what would it look like? What would success look like from your perspective if this is successful? And then you got your goal then. I think that's a few things I'd say there.
I love how you now see all the skills that you acquired along the way. And actually you're tapping in on, it's not the hard skills, it's the human skills. But in the moment, you did or you didn't realize you were acquiring these incredibly powerful skills that would one day lead you to the role that you're in now?
Not at all. I think I was probably very young and didn't didn't understand that. Actually, I think we've more of an understanding of skill development, maybe now, or skills first, as we call it nationally, than maybe we would have had when we were younger. Maybe you might have felt like that, Vanessa. I don't know. You know, when you were young in your 20s, late 20s, did you know, you just, I think you're focused on your career and where's your next promotion and where am I going next and how can I earn more money? How can I have a good time? I think that's all part of it. But I don't think you think about that as much as I see a lot of graduates we have even in here in IDA or some of the younger people I deal with in companies. You know, they have their mindset is that little bit different. They're always, and I think the education system's changed a little bit in that regard as well. You know, and in lectures now it is about, hey, this is a new skill you're developing here. You know, they're using that language. I don't think that was language I heard. I can remember hearing much about. Maybe you'd be younger than me, so you might have heard the word skills a bit more in your 20s and early 30s. But I don't remember it like that. It was more about the tasks and the role you did,
Yeah,
I
well,
think.
I worked in recruitment. I
Mm,
with a brilliant team. We had a school of sales on College Green in Dublin, and we would take in the underrepresented and people with amazing potential, but on paper they were getting rejected again and
mm,
again. So it was a combination of maybe returning parents, some refugees, highly skilled from different countries, but just our country wasn't ready at that point in time
mm,
necessarily to open the doors to, you know, unusual, underrepresented, whatever definition you want to
mm,
put on what the experience was or the circumstance. And so during that week, our goal was to actually extract the skills. And at the end of the week, so develop and extract and then present them. And but we got to work with a lot of the American companies like Salesforce,
mm.
Oracle, Dell, because they were open-minded. They
Yeah.
understood it was
Mhm,
beyond if someone was a certain color, location, degree, if someone had the skills, but we had to
that's it.
prove it. And that was back in 2003, 2004, 5. And I absolutely loved it. But actually, to answer your question, and I love how you're nearly interviewing me.
Sorry, Vanessa.
Someone asked me what were my human skills.
Mm,
Beyond communication team player,
mm,
I struggled. And I think now today that answer is actually really important to be able to recognize your skills.
mm.
So I'd love to ask you, what shift are you seeing with the company's dialogue around upskilling, reskilling, hard skills, soft skills, transferable skills? What has that shift been like in the last few
Mm.
years?
Oh, it's really interesting because I would have seen, can't say how many years ago, but certainly not more current. So let's say 10 years ago and beyond and before that, you'd see a lot of focus on what we call industry skills specific. So very much technical skills, you know. Now, I don't think listeners would find this unusual. Probably anyone listening would probably be nodding away as they're driving or they're having a sandwich or whatever to this podcast. And I can well imagine them saying, yeah, I know exactly what you means. The more technically good you are, that's what promotion was based on because you hit the targets. Everything was like that. And then I think as it was recognized that leadership suddenly became important, like we would see strong leaders in our subsidiaries here in Ireland as making the difference. They're the ones that last the pace. They're the ones that make good decisions because they've got good leadership skills and capabilities. So I would have seen in the last year, certainly any company that submits training proposals to us for support through grant aid, a lot of transversal skills, innovation skills, problem solving. They all talk about critical thinking, being able to take analysis and data and turn it into a story, being able to communicate that story. Very high on the list, as would be digital skills, you know, the ability to take data, to manipulate it, to manage it, to make decisions based on digital capability. So I've seen those calling again nationally as transversal skills that you mentioned, Vanessa, too. Those have become really important for companies. And it's wonderful to see the infrastructure coming in and behind that. We're probably the only country in the world that has a national talent development agency in SkillNet. Solace. Oh my goodness, regional skills for the stuff they're doing. The focus on the transversal skills is phenomenal. I mean, to think that you'd be able to get a very short, sharp little micro credential, for example, a little qualification in a very short, sharp time that you can add towards much greater qualification down the line. It's just like the system has cranked up to meet the needs of what employers are saying around soft transversal skills. And every time we do customer survey, a client survey, which we do every second year with our own 1,800 companies, we always ask them about skills, of course. And the top of the list are always, the soft skills. Okay, yeah, there'll be some technical, hard, of course, skills that are required, but never lost are the soft skills. And as I said, it's always the leadership, communication, critical thinking, problem solving, using data, all of those. I definitely have seen a shift in that direction over the last number of years. And then the more than year 7 myself, I hear lots of podcasts on transversal skills and a lot more speakers on it. So there's kind of it's like a new age or something, a bit old age really, but new age thinking on it is getting the conversation going, I think, around the importance of those skills, those human-centric skills. Finally, I suppose what I would have seen, manufacturing is a very good example here. There used to be manufacturing 2, and then there was manufacturing 3, and then there was manufacturing 4.0. And companies that are manufacturing in Ireland would try to aspire to that. But Industry 5.0 has 2 elements to it that differs from before. One is human-centric manufacturing, and the other is sustainability. So those 2 elements have now gone in to create world-class in manufacturing. And that's a really interesting turn. But I do think the discussions like you and I are having really do add to the conversation. It makes people think, it makes people think about, okay, you know what, there's something in this. And these human qualities are what knits us all together, I suppose.
Quick question. Do you actually know what skills exist across your organizations today? Or are decisions still being made on job titles, CVs, and assumptions around who can be reskilled and upskilled? You see, as AI reshapes work and organizations really face that pressure to cut costs, the real challenge isn't just skills gaps. It's understanding which skills are transferable and which can be redeployed into the future with a bit of upskilling. So for the listeners of Global Skills Podcast, Abodu, our sponsor, has created this free Skills AI readiness assessment. It gives leaders clarity in just 3 minutes. It shows skills gaps, automation exposure, and where future-ready capabilities already exist within your business. No data upload, no preparation, just clarity for the future of your organization. Visit abodu.com/global skills podcast. Now, back to the episode.
I do want to really compliment IDA because I think that the grants available for supporting upskilling and reskilling, now that I've done my analysis globally, they're second to none. They are incredible. And I'd love you to explain what is the support for companies that are here in Ireland that are focused on reskilling and upskilling. And from my perspective, I spoke at an event a year ago to a lot of leaders in Ireland. And the question I asked was, how many of you have skills gaps? And nearly every hand went up, in a group of about 100. And then the next question was, how many of you know your exact skills gap in real time? And it was a handful of hands. So I'm interested to know, one, about the opportunities at IDA, but 2, what do you think is the knowledge base that companies currently have around their skills gap today and in the near future?
Okay, so if I take the opportunities from, first of all, your first part of the question there, Vanessa. So I could talk about supports till the cows come home and everybody will fall asleep. So I'm going to make it as simple as I possibly can. I'm going to talk about one support that IDEA offers in terms of upskilling and reskilling. And I'm glad you used that language because that's what it's all about. So imagine being able to access €3 million, up to 50% of your investment in upskilling and reskilling your sites. And imagine that some of that funding goes towards the cost of being off-site to learn something, or the cost of your time online doing training. So the costs, the main costs that would come into us would be the personnel cost, the cost of the people participating in the training. So that's something that we cover. So I think that's phenomenal. Now, imagine this. Imagine if you have a training program, a 3-year training program in your business, and it has when I mentioned already, some SkillNet training, some regional-based training, all subsidised by the government, which we wouldn't then grant aid. but we grant aid the people that are participating on those subsidised training programmes. I mean, imagine that combination. A fund from a grant aid from the IDA and then subsidised training programmes. How anyone couldn't take advantage of that, I don't know. But here's kind of the way it happens before I go on to your second part of the question. The first thing is, if you're an IDA company listening in, you're probably foreign owned, so you'll be multinational in Ireland. You need to contact the IDA to talk about upskilling and reskilling, and then we'll help you with the rest. So none of that has to be done to access that fund and that grant. None of that has to be done by yourself. That's what we're here for. Then we have the SkillNet has a whole range of regional SkillNet or regional skills managers, and we connect in with them to help companies source the different programs for their staff. So they don't even have to do that themselves. So there's loads of help and support in the system. And why? Because if our companies, both our Enterprise Ireland and our IDA companies, survive, that means people will be employed. It's very simple in one way, and another way it's quite, challenging. So that brings me on then to the second. That's why both the agencies are here to help companies. So that's the first thing. And then on the second thing about identifying skills gaps. So there is an expert group. There's a National Skills Council, and they work through the expert group on future skills, where surveys of the future skills for sectors are identified. And then people like me and groups of others implement those recommendations from those reports. So we're kind of keeping an eye nationally on what's coming down the line, what's going on. So a great example of it then is you get your universities and your SkillNet and your Solace, and you're all responding to those skill needs. So the provision in the system is phenomenal, and it's all there, different levels. Finding it sometimes can be very challenging for companies, and that's why they need to come to their agencies to help them. So from a national level through the European level, that's where the skills are identified for the future. But also companies, if we take this skills-based approach first, we were talking about a moment ago, rather than the roles or rather than the tasks. If we look at how skills have changed, even if you look, Vanessa, at your own work or my work, and the way our skills are different skills are needed, so different in the different roles we play, but the roles may not change too much. So in terms of skills, it is very much about always upskilling and reskilling yourself. So there's a bit of an onus on an individual as well, just as much as there are with organisations. Sometimes organisations definitely need help in identifying skills. And we do this in 5 key areas. So we can provide skills needs assessments in 5 key areas for our client companies. And you won't be surprised to note, because you've mentioned a few of them already, as sustainability, innovation, digitalisation, and transversal skills. So we can help companies identify what are the future skills you need across those areas, and then how to fill the gaps. So there's massive amount of help out there. Companies like yourself, let's face it, you can do that already for companies because you have the technology to do it. So it's finding the right options for you as a company, and that's where the agencies can help to do that with you.
It's phenomenal, really. And I know I've said it already, to be able to access that type of support and relatively quickly as well, if the submission and approvals are made. Really, obviously very proud and happy that Abode is one of the talent partners should a company want to work with us. But I'd love to ask about, a lot of people have focused on the US, the changes, maybe companies potentially considering new locations. I think the richness of talent will play a huge part in keeping companies here. What role does talent development play in that overall picture, do you think, in maintaining our employment rates, creating new employment for young talent? And what role does education play in that overall ecosystem as well?
I think both of them play an exceptionally important role. I mean, let's face it, if you're a learning and development specialist in your organisation, you're there to help your leadership team to get the right balance of skill. You don't want to be spending your time recruiting, with the greatest of regard to recruiters out there. You want to be able to retain a certain amount of your employees, particularly if you're investing in them. So why not put that up to the leadership team? We need to be reskilling and upskilling all the time so that you don't have your HR and OD functions constantly recruiting new people, because people have moved on because they're not getting the career opportunity they want with you. So I think that the technical specialism of a learning or a HR person is underestimated, first of all, in an organisation. But I think we all, that profession needs to be very pushy and get sitting up there with the leadership team, really getting the data right and showing, using data and numbers, why it's important and more cost efficient to upskill and reskill people. Using the fact you can get an IDA grant or an Enterprise Ireland grant, for example, that you can get subsidised programmes, that if you keep your people, it's cheaper than recruiting every year, year on year, and so on. So that you do need data to make sense of the story, I think. As regards the infrastructure, I think there's been a phenomenal response from the infrastructure to changes. As I said to you earlier, the provision is there. Sourcing it for companies, hands up, might be a bit challenging because there's so much out there. But I think that the universities, the private providers, the other agencies across the system are phenomenally good at responding. And I might be a bit bold to add that a lot of it might have been to do with something like COVID, that brings, all of a sudden, there's partnerships springing up everywhere on how to teach people to work remotely, for example. Well, that only happened because of the pandemic. So in a way, it just goes to show you we can change if we have to, and we can respond quickly when we need to. So I hope we keep the momentum of that responsiveness and speed as we go forward, for sure, because that's really important for enterprises. Because as you, in your opening remarks, phenomenal, world changes and speed of change you mentioned. So the infrastructure really has to respond to that. And I think in the main it does.
I think you hit on a really interesting point there around equipping heads of L&D with the right tools or data intelligence or numbers. I actually had on Ed Monks, who's the head of the Learning and Professional Institute in the UK. And he said it's not that L&D should be asking for a seat. They should just take the seat.
Yeah.
We need to equip them with the right skills, data, information, courses. And I'm coming across a lot of large companies who are maybe cancelling big learning licenses because what they've discovered when they've looked at the numbers and looked at the data, that they may have enabled learning access to, say, 1,000 employees. But actually the average learning completion rate for large online learning programs is 6%. That's this industry standard. So for L&D to go and have those conversations with the C-suite, what information do you think they need to have in order to not just get approval to make investments, but also have more influence? And I will just caveat with this. I made a prediction a year ago that I felt like multinationals would start to create roles called Chief of Skills. And I just saw a Chief of Skills being promoted 2 weeks ago. So I'm like, come on, everyone's going to do it, because the Chief of Skills ultimately would be connecting L&D, talent, recruitment in one common skills language, or whatever you want to call it. So sorry, it's a very long-winded question.
No, I understand.
Empower them.
Yeah, I understand what you're getting at, and I can't say them on air, I suppose. But I mean, I have seen some of the most phenomenal examples. I have one where there is head of people. That's another one, Vanessa, put on your books, and with the focus on L&D, and they used AI over a very short period of time in thousands and thousands of people, organization, tech. This is a technology company, and sitting in America, fiddling about, used AI and Copilot to help them build a competency framework for their technical skills. And they wanted it based in Ireland, which they made happen. So that now all happened because the relationship between the Irish site and the American HQ was very strong. We're going back to our transversal skills again and touching on them. You can sense that, can't you? But I have seen some phenomenal L&D leads who are trying to bring their sites together, who are using data like reduction in staff turnover, recruitment costs versus retention. They're using data like value versus benefit, cost versus benefit. They're using the same kind of performance indicators that the organization's using. So, for example, Johnson & Johnson in Limerick, a great John down there is the L&D manager, and he says to me, Breda, I turned it all into a formula. And what he does is he turns, he uses the savings on the subsidized courses, the grant aid from IDA, and all of that, and he builds a formula or going to his leadership team and saying, here's how much we're saving in Ireland. Here's how much it costs in Spain or Portugal or whatever to upskill and reskill your people. Uses data, not fluffy words or nice sentences, beautifully narrated paragraphs. He uses data because that's what the leadership team understand. So insights and data are things I think are so important. At one time you could sell to the emotion. I think now you're having to sell to the hard data side of things. But certainly I think using that kind of information is really important. And I think another one that I've seen used is the risks. So, they look at where the company has high risks and vulnerability, and they build a case around that for upskilling and reskilling people. Or maybe where they'd see potential retirees, a number of them coming up over the next 3 years. I've seen some of our organisations build a case around that using data. So you're going to lose these 3 people. They've got X amount of years, X amount of knowledge. That's to the value of. And then they look at the other side and said, to recruit those people, it's impossible because you're never going to generate that kind of knowledge. You need people in behind them where they're going to be mentored. I mean, some fantastic stories like that I have in some of that will be the larger multinationals where they have a function that enables them to use the resources to do that. But data is certainly, I think that's has to be part of the story.
I agree. And actually, I would like to just put out there for any companies that are listening today that are smaller, we do have a free skills gap cost calculator.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I think what surprises me, I used to work in recruitment, so I always knew what was the cost of losing someone. It was maybe 2.5 times their salary. But then there's so many other factors involved. If you're training and upskilling and replacing and the opportunity loss, if that role is open for 6 months and, or you're cutting people that shouldn't be cut, because you might, with AI skills, they could be phenomenal for your business in 6 months' time, but they just need a bit more investment now. Don't just let them go. So I think there's lots to be done, but we'll make that link available below.
Oh, do, Vanessa, because I think that would be really helpful for companies, and I'm sure they can contact you about it. But I think any of those formulas or I won't sound like a mathematician because I'm as far removed from that as anything. But, any of those formulas where you think, I need to use data here because that's the leadership speak. I think the leadership speak is really, really important. And when I go up to my own leadership or board, I'm trying to look at the language they use and the data they use, and I go right back to that. So, and so far it's brought success for what we want to do, but I do think that's really important. I guess that's a considered transversal skill, isn't it? Kind of listening and understanding the organisation and the politics and the way things, and influencing, all those soft transversal skills to get your case across. But I think L&D leads should be get up there, and I'm in agreement with your previous speaker. Get up there and get in there and show the value that you can bring by understanding the business, and then showing the leadership team how important the upskilling and reskilling agenda really is, how we can actually longer term save money.
We have a closing tradition to every interview where you can answer both. You used to be you can just answer one, but it's up to you. You can just answer one or both. Is there a skill that you developed when you were younger that you don't maybe use as much or anymore and you'd love to? And if so, why? And the second question is, I think it's a really tough time for people out there. I think there's a lot of graduates that are not getting called back for interview, people that have been made redundant or taken voluntary redundancy and are really feeling like, what should I do? What's the best move I can make? And what advice would you give them?
Okay. Oh, Vanessa, they're tough questions to be ending on. So I think one of the things when I was younger, I loved music. Well, I still love music, but I used to play guitar and piano. And of course, I gave them up 100 years ago. All right, I'm not that old to anybody listening in, but I haven't kept up that. And I'm kind of sorry about that. And I know you say, well, what's that got to do with the workplace, Breda? Come on. But, people in the workplace have so many different skills that they use. I see us here now as a team of IDA staff, and there's loads of people that bring in their musical instruments because we might sing for our charity. It's Doctors Without Borders this year. So we might sing for our charity at Christmas in the Stephen's Green or in Dundrum Centre. And I thought, wouldn't it be lovely enough if I could just pick that guitar up and contribute to this? So that's kind of one I'm sorry I didn't retain. And you're never too old to learn, I know that. But that was one that just as to the first question. And the second question, I think, is try the best you can to get feedback. Like, why didn't I get shortlisted for that job? Don't be afraid to go back, because the more feedback you can get, and this is probably an older one, you've heard this, people say this many times, Vanessa, I'm sure, but the more feedback you can get, the more you can improve yourself. Without it, it's very hard to know why you didn't get shortlisted, or, why you. So I think that's really important. And for those maybe that, because I would have seen it with friends of mine and indeed my own family, for those people who, have retired early or done, get involved in the community. It's so rich to be involved in your community, if it's at all possible. My father and sister are very, very involved in our own community in Connemara, and they've done an awful lot of really good things that have helped that community to thrive. When I was in regional development running around the country, you could see it immediately, where there was a real strong group of people who cared about their community, and that's what attracts the jobs as well. So I think if you can do that at all, if you have a spare moment and you've left the traditional working, paid work, there's always so much to do in a community, and I think it's very, very rewarding.
Yeah, and Ireland being Ireland is you never know who knows someone who knows someone.
Oh, so right, so right.
Breda, thank you so much. And throughout this whole episode, there's two things. One, I think from an individual level, just that feeling of transversal skills. You're never pigeonholed. It's never one path. I mean, look at how you've evolved and the role that you're in now. And the second is, I think there is maybe a stereotype when it comes to government funding that it's going to be very difficult, very inaccessible. But you have shown a lot today on just how supporting the different government agencies are to make it a reality. So I hope that leaders that are listening today that are outside of Ireland that think, maybe we should open an office in Ireland.
Yes, please.
Yes, for leaders that are, and that's something I used to work on many years ago, and I really enjoyed selling Ireland to American companies. And then the other is the companies that are here that you avail of what's there, what's available. And it's just been an honour to have you on. Thank you so much, Breda.
I think the honour is all mine. Thank you for inviting me on, Vanessa. Love to talk to you.
Whether you're leading a business, shaping education, planning your next career move, or just starting out, you're part of a global conversation about how we learn, work, and grow. If you've enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss what's next. And for early access to new episodes, first invites to events, and a chance to connect with others driving real change, join the community at globalskillspodcast.com, because the future of skills belongs to all of us.